Hi, I'm Matthew Stone, and I'm a YouTuber. Children think that's hilarious because I'm nearly 50. But I've been putting up YouTube videos since 2007 of me playing the saxophone, lots of jazz standards, and by way of an apology, because I've not posted a YouTube video for some time, probably nearly a year, there are reasons for that, and one of the reasons is that I feel that I've pretty much reached, or I had reached, the point where I had nothing new to say in terms of playing the saxophone. I still play a lot. I still rehearse with a trio once every couple of weeks, and also I practice almost every day. Just there's nothing really, I didn't feel there was anything I could really put up that I was going to be very proud of. So I was thinking today, I've got a bit of spare time this evening, so I'd do a little bit of a talking YouTube video, which I've never done before, but the kids do it, and it seems to be very popular, and I don't know whether this is going to work or not, so bear with me. So firstly, an apology for not posting something for so long, but hopefully if you're a saxophonist, or maybe even a guitarist, I don't know, or another instrumentalist, this might help, because I want to talk about what has helped me in the last 11 years, what's made me, in inverted commas, a better musician, and also what's not worked, as equally important, what's not worked in terms of the time I've wasted, rabbit holes of buying stuff and practicing things that didn't work, or some misdirection. So hopefully I can save you all a bit of time and make what little time we have on our instruments more effective. Massive caveat, number one, I am not a professional musician. I have not studied jazz theory at a high level. I have not even passed the fundamental music exams. So everything I say to you is, most of it self-taught, and therefore can be taken with a pinch of salt. However, I feel I've progressed in my playing, and I think for the first time feel confident enough to at least give people who are starting, hopefully not misdirection, but hopefully some tips that might help them. So the purpose, as I say, is to try and put across in as short a time as I can. It may take more than one video, some things that I've learned and things. So I mentioned that I wasn't a professional musician, so I'm going to give you a little bit of history about why I play the saxophone and how it all started. So as a child, I learnt to play the flute very badly. I was a very basic grade flute player. I passed 2 simple exams, grades 1 and 2. And grade 1, literally, you just have to be able to pick it up, I think. Grade 2, read a little bit, but I was a terrible reader. I managed to get into the county youth orchestra, the very basic one, and spent most of the time at the back pretending to be able to read music, and most of the time I was on the wrong page, both literally and metaphorically, with my fellow young musicians. So not a great start on the flute. Piano, again, my parents, all of us played the piano. I've got 2 brother and a sister, and I did not excel. I got to grade 2, I think, or grade 3 on that instrument, and so my reading skills were very poor. I went mad keen on popular music, sort of indie music, when I was a kid. It was bands like the Smiths and Echo and the Bunnymen and Orange Juice, all these sort of new wave British and Scottish indie bands, and I wanted to play the guitar like them. So I badgered my parents, and they bought me an acoustic guitar. It's always an acoustic, never an electric. And they said, "Look, we've paid enough for lessons for you. You're going to have you're on your own. You're going to have to teach yourself." So some chord books. A little bit later, I could strum some chords. I didn't know much about musical theory, but basically it was all about shapes on the guitar. It's all shape based, and a lot of the music that I like, the contemporary music, use chords which I now know to be obviously basic jazz chords. So classically, the major 7th is used a lot. Sort of Red Hot Chili Peppers, even into the 90s, that sound. And so I gravitated towards the sound of the jazz guitar, and my father was a journalist, local newspaper journalist, also very into jazz, and so all we ever listened to as children was jazz. And as I got a bit older, I started to listen to more jazz guitar and I wanted to play it. However, there's a stumbling block, and I now know what it is, and that's theory. And jazz guitar is really hard, and I sort of played at it, but never really understood what I was doing. I mainly didn't take the time to learn the guitar properly, but I sort of got away with it in a band setting. So as a child, 17, 18, up to my very early 20s, was playing in sort of local indie bands and sort of fudging my way through a lot of stuff. And I moved to a town called Peterborough, not far from where I live now in Leicester, and there's a guy I met there called Nick Smith, a great bass player, and I sort of met him in a guitar shop and we started jamming together. He'd got a band, they'd already got a guitarist, no room for me, and the guitarist, nice guy called Steve, he had a tenor sax in the corner of his room, and I think I'd have been about 19, and I picked it up and said, I've never played one, do you mind if I have a go? And I had a go, and I thought, I'll get a note out of this. Really enjoyed it, and to cut a long story short, about a month later I'd bought myself a beginner alto sax, a very basic instrument, and then I played with this band, and to be honest, I think I only turned up for 2 or 3 rehearsals, and then the instrument was with me. I left Peterborough, unfortunately, about 3 or 4 months later. Went back to live elsewhere, and the horn came with me, but I'd never really played it that much, and it was kind of like I kind of knew that it needed some effort, and I was too busy doing other things. So I think when I was about 21, I sold the saxophone, but I carried on with my guitar noodling, which is a constant bane for my family because I just played nonsense, and I don't really know what I'm doing on the guitar, and I still don't. It's still a mystery. And funnily enough, this Nick guy, the bass player, I met him 18 years later, I met him in a local shop. It was out of context, and he said, "Gosh, it's Matthew. Hello." I said, "Hello, Nick." And he had his girlfriend with him, and he said, "Oh, Matthew's he plays the saxophone." And I thought, "No, I don't. I haven't played one for years, and I barely played it then." I thought, "Oh, okay." He said, "Do you still play?" I said, "No, I don't." And I went home and I thought, "Well, do you know what? I think I'll try again because why not? You only live once." So I did the same thing. Bought myself a little Yamaha alto sax, and then within, I think, about a month, I was putting these YouTube videos up and posting on forums saying, "Hey guys, newbie here. What do you think? A bit of advice." And that went on for a few years, and I gradually got better. And I think within a year, I was playing in a big band, but a very, I'm not being mean to my co-band members, but it was they were very tolerant, let's say, of my lack of formal education. But in the background, I did have some lessons. I had probably a year's worth of lessons every couple of weeks with a guy who just taught me some fundamentals, like not so much my embouchure, but it was more about scales and a little bit of theory, and got my reading up to a standard. I used to bring in the big band music that I was struggling with, and he'd help me through it, and that was a great help. And then I stopped the lessons because I just basically I wanted to move more into jazz and doing a lot more improvising, and that side wasn't really being helped. So a lot of self-education, then a lot of theory work myself, a lot of really trying to get to the bottom of this damned instrument, and I don't think I ever will. And I've had a few lessons with a few people since, here and there, the odd month run of a couple of weeks worth, just to try and improve my knowledge. But I don't tolerate being taught very well. I'm not very good at being taught by other people. Sometimes I just need to figure it out myself. I think I spend my life trying to find shortcuts, and I think we all do this, and sometimes there aren't any. And what I'd like to try and do is point out where shortcuts don't work, and where you just have to put some effort in. I think the whole instrument's like that, but there are a few things tips that I've learned that have helped. So, first thing, I think I should probably have a little title here coming up saying the instrument. The most fundamental thing is getting the instrument right and choosing which one of the 3 horns you want, alto, tenor or soprano. I started on the alto, and it's still really my first love. I love the sound of the alto. My father was a big fan of people like Art Pepper and Lenny Niehaus, all that sort of 1950s West Coast sound, and it's still the style of music that I really enjoy. And so the alto fits that quite nicely, and obviously the tenor, you've got Stan Getz and people like that, but it's the alto, the Paul Desmond sound. We all, it's a lovely sound. But soon, I think about 2 years after I started, I thought, wow, I'm going to try a tenor. And once you have a tenor, it's a bit like the dark side, it's sort of, and I think my tone suited the tenor better. My natural embouchure suited it. So I soon settled on the tenor. But the instrument itself is an interesting one, and no matter which one you choose, and that's a matter of personal preference, although I wouldn't recommend starting on the soprano. It's a tricky one tuning wise, and I think it's a more advanced instrument in terms of getting the sound right. But either choose alto or tenor, the most important thing is to get the right instrument. And I would say that the mistake I made was very early on, was changing both the instrument and the mouthpiece. And actually, when I listen to old recordings now of me playing on, I think I started off on a Wallstein tenor, and then I moved to a Yanagisara, and then eventually got a Selmer. The actual tone it produces is not much different, and I think we can all get obsessed with the instrument. I think as long as it's serviceable, it plays. It's not got any major faults, and have someone who does play check it out for you, take it to repair, and check that there's no leaks. Because the most frustrating things, we're playing with a horn that's got a leak, is it can really be depressing because you're having to work twice as hard, and that can be frustrating. But as long as there are no leaks and it plays reasonably in tune, and that's something with every horn you have to learn to correct anyway, I'd say just an intermediate sort of student level horn. I still play my alto is it's a £500 sort of what's that, $700 instrument. It's not particularly expensive, but I get a nicer sound I think out of that as I ever did out of my silver plated Yamaha YS62. However, if someone wants to send me one for free, then please do, because that's quite a nice horn. So a good level instrument. Mouthpiece wise, again, wow, what a rabbit hole that is. I've used the same tenor mouthpiece now for must be going on 8-9 years, and it's just an Otto Link hard rubber. I think it's a 7-star or a 7. I don't even know what it is. I don't care anymore. I think you reach that point where you sort of stop being interested in mouthpieces and more interested in what sound you can get out of anything. And I read all these stories about John Coltrane used to carry a hold all full of mouthpieces and would throw them away in frustration. And I think, that's when you're at a level where that makes a massive, that I can understand that. And there are certain players, if you go on forums and things, like I think it's Steve Neff, who just play tests mouthpiece after mouthpiece. But he's a wonderful player, and I think that's a great hobby. But if you actually got very limited time, I'd say pick a mouthpiece, stick with it for all of its foibles, learn to love it. And because I've found out that invariably, like the horn, you change your mouthpiece, you change your reed, you change your setup, after about 2 weeks you sound like yourself again, because you sort of, it's your ear that does the compensating. Your ear is what gets you the sound you want, and you make micro adjustments every time to your setup in order to be able to get the sound you want in your head. So the first thing, instrument, good standard, make sure it's well set up. Mouthpiece, similarly, try and get something reasonably good quality. Obviously, reeds is a whole another rabbit hole, but something comfortable that you can play for, an hour at a time rather than something that hurts your lip. That's a good start. Get them serviced regularly. I get mine serviced every year or so if I can afford it. Sometimes I do one and not the other. And then the most important thing is to stick with them and just spend your time practicing rather than looking on forums and trying to choose which horn to buy next. And I suppose the forums is a next thing. Forums and the YouTube generally. So how helpful are they? Well, YouTube has been incredibly helpful. And the reason why YouTube is incredibly helpful for me and has been helpful is that I, from very first YouTube video I did, and mainly because of technical restrictions, in that I was lucky enough to have a hard disk audio recorder back then in 2007, which was made by Zoom, and cutting and dropping in sort of sections of a song were very difficult and a bit clunky, so I didn't used to bother. It's called punching in and out. So I used to try and do, I didn't try, I did everything I have ever recorded in one take. Now, importantly, it's not always the first take. It could be sometimes the 20th take, or even worse. But the important thing is it flowed from the very moment I picked the horn up to the end of the song was always one seamless recording. And when you listen to, or when you watch a band record, like a pop band, they tend to do obviously multiple. They might spend 2 days on one solo and just keep dropping in and over recording, overdubbing this. I didn't want to do that. Everything I've ever recorded is one take. And what that unwittingly taught me is that I didn't realise this, but it's actually really useful skill, because what you're doing is you're taking a song, you're preparing yourself for it. So before I put something on YouTube, I'd always practice it for maybe a day, or sometimes 4 or 5 days, or a week, however long until I felt comfortable enough with it. I'd then record my first take, and invariably I listen to it back and think, nah, that's not good enough. So then I'd perhaps do an hour's worth of recording, so maybe 10, 15 takes on the same tune. And then I would then sometimes not post it that night. I'd then listen to it again the next day. I think, I still think I could do better. And then I'd record it again. And sometimes the first take the next day is often the best one. But what's really interesting about that process is it's actually just repetition. It's also, what it does is that last, I remember this feeling, and I still get it now, is that as you play each chorus, and you maybe done 2 choruses, and you're back into then the head, and maybe the head's tricky, because some of them are really tricky, is that sweaty palm feeling of thinking, I've got to get this last head right, because I'm really happy with my two choruses, my 2 solos, and I don't want to have to start the damn thing all over again, and I don't want to drop stuff in. So it prepares you, if you like, for a life of playing music under pressure, because it is, self-imposed, but it's still a pressure situation. And music, when you play out, and I still play out regularly, and when I started, it made that transition much easier. And of course, self-criticism is very important in music. Now, what you do with that YouTube video is very interesting. You don't have to post it, because you can just watch it yourself and think, and look at it back in a year's time. You don't have to put it on the internet to share it with the world. I did. Sometimes that was a positive thing, sometimes it's a negative thing. And all I'll say is that, particularly if you post it and then put on a forum, which was my early sort of habit, was to post something on YouTube, put on a forum, Sax on the web or whatever forum, hey, listen to this, guys, what do you think? And there was a whole sections of YouTube. I think then it was only recordings, and YouTube was quite new. So, and people would put some really nice, helpful comments, and a lot of people are very helpful. Some people unwittingly discourage you by telling you all the faults, but that's good in a way. You need to know what the faults are. But I think you have to really think about the motivation for putting the stuff up. I think the temptation is, it's a bit like when you watch the X Factor and you see a singer and they come on and they sing and you think, oh no, they're not very good at all. And then they kind of tell, they interview them after and say, well, and they say, oh, my friends and family all think I'm brilliant. And you think, yeah, it's a bit like that with forums. There's a certain group of people that will compliment each other, and it's like a big virtual hug. Oh, you've commented on my video, so I'll comment on your video and say something nice. And before you know it, you're in this loop of sort of like self-deception. And sometimes you do really have to watch the critical comments and think, actually, you're right, I am only playing one scale, or I'm not being inventive enough, and my timing's off, and I need to listen to other people more, and take the plaudits, but also listen to the criticism properly, and use it, use that criticism. However, there are also just some bloody rude people out there as well, and offensive people. So prepare yourself for an onslaught. I'm sure I'm going to get some from this one as well, but hey ho, that's life. So yes, posting on YouTube, a very useful skill. If you're going to do it, try and do it in one take, because I think that's very, very good. Listen to it over and over again, and use it as a way of documenting your progress. Take the positive comments from people, enjoy them. Remember, you're at a certain level. I perhaps sometimes got away with myself a bit and thought I was better than I really was, because there's nothing like playing live, and there's nothing like playing with other people who are at a really high level, to suddenly realise, and I do this all the time, is to think, I'm really not that good, because you suddenly start turning up playing with a singer and they call a song in C sharp, and you think, I'm really not that good. But pros are that good on the whole. So remember your limitations, take the criticism in both respects correctly. So in terms of actual playing, the things I did right, I think, was to get my tone right. And so how did I go about doing that? And I'm going to get my horn out here, so excuse me, I'm probably going to go quiet for a minute. One saxophone. So for me, the tone is the most important thing. I probably think I've probably got quite a monotonous speaking voice, but it's a bit, if you hear a singer, particularly on these talent shows, and they're singing these amazingly technical swoops and sort of trills and interesting stuff, but if the tone doesn't grab you, then forget it. And I think with a horn, and even funnily enough on the guitar, you can still get a good tone on the guitar. It's not just a on or off thing. With the saxophone, the things that helped my tone most of all was this thing called long tones, which most people know about and think, they sound boring, and God, they are boring. But I never did long tone exercises, but what I did do was I found a few ballads that involved lots of long holding notes, and I used to again listen to myself, record myself, listen back, and try and make those long notes as full and as beautiful as I could. One of those songs is a song called Soul Eyes by Mal Waldron. It's a good standard. It's quite tricky to play in places. It's got some interesting chord changes, but fundamentally the melody is just lots of long tones, and I think that's a typical example of finding a song where you play it ad nauseum, keep playing it, and keep playing these slow ballads, and the tone will come. And the other thing about the tone is, I don't know why more people don't talk about this, but I think the tone obviously comes from the mouthpiece, from the saxophone, and from your body. And I think what's really interesting with the saxophone is that there's lots of, again, Google it all you like, it's fun, but lots of different opinions. It is only opinion on how much each one influences the sound. But for me, the horn feels like about 5%. The mouthpiece feels about 10%, 15% maybe with the mouthpiece, and the reed, actually for me quite a lot, because the reed is like, I'd say another 10%. So what have we got there? 30, 40%. The rest of it is from you, and I think the most important bit is from you. And for me, that tone is about making my mouth cavity as big as possible. So the way I get that sound, the way I get that feeling, is quite hard to explain. So I have to do like I'm going to look stupid doing it, but I have to almost drop. And I see the way I'm speaking is like ridiculously sort of, I can't describe it, but you can only hear it. And what I'm doing when I'm doing that is I'm relaxing all of my throat muscles to make my throat bigger. And I'm basically making the cavity inside my mouth as big as possible. And it almost feels like it's acting like an acoustic register. So I'll play you not doing it, and I'll play you doing it and see what the difference is. Get the mouthpiece correct. So here is me just playing without increasing my mouth cavity. And here I am going to increase my mouth cavity. I'm really dropping my jaw, I'm almost playing with a constant subtone, and you'll hear this subtone thing a lot. But the subtone, I almost play with subtone, all the time. So it's like if I didn't do that, a low note would be. Whereas with the dropped jaw and the sort of big mouth sound would be. And again, the terminal vibrato at the end of the note. So there's lots of vibrato styles, and you have to find your own. But I like to hold a note quite hard and steady, and then an introduced vibrato at the end of the note. So if you listen to a typical sound for me would be. So introducing that sort of vibrato just at the end. And a lot of it is a lot of it really is a safety technique, because your tuning can go at the end of the note. So if you add a bit of vibrato, it does sound nice, obviously, but it helps with the tuning correction as well. So work on the tone. The tone is key, and don't get too hung up on the mouthpiece for the tone or the instrument. It's all about this cavity. It's about the mouth seal. It's about where your lip forms, forming that little pad. And not biting too hard. There's lots of tiny micro adjustments involved in getting that tone right, and so I spend a lot of time on tone. And sometimes, and I still do this now, I don't even look at any music for sort of a practice session. I'll just play notes and listen to myself. It's good to play against a wall or a reflective surface, and by that I mean a fairly dead room wall. Don't play in like your kitchen or your bathroom, because that has problems with that, in that you get a lovely reverb, but it doesn't now flatter what you sound like, and it's a bit like, I'm not going to put any reverb on this, and you'll see that a horn sounds very different. In fact, here's an experiment. What I'll do is I'll play you something, just a little anything, and then I'll play it again, and I'll add reverb and compression the second time round, and you'll see what it sounds like. So So the second time I'm going to add reverb and compression, and you'll see what a difference it makes. And if you play it yourself in a very reflective environment, you do get a bit of a false impression, but it's getting that dry tone right as well. So we've covered recording yourself, important. We've covered the equipment, getting your tone right. I think the other thing that is important is having some fundamental lessons on how to play the horn. I unfortunately have got some really bad habits, like my fingers fly all the time, terrible. And also I've got big holes in my musical theory, which I constantly have to try and fill. But having lessons in terms of be specific. So if you're not interested in doing grades or doing classical theory, tell your tutor. And if your tutor's not going to help you, find another tutor, and just find someone who wants to do what you want to do, because at the end of the day you're paying. And if you want to be able to play jazz, and all you want to do is go and stand up somewhere for a bit of fun, or record something on YouTube if you're doing some blues, just be clear about what you want, and hopefully you'll get the right advice. But what was taught, I went to a guy for lessons fundamentally about just having some, getting my scales right, and being able to read, because being able to read was really important. So to me, to play in this big band, so get some fundamental lessons, and with that little, practicing weekly the scales, you'll be able to play. And this is the final thing I want to talk about, really, which is about playing over a head in an interesting way. I'm not going to talk about building a solo, because that's I think I'm going to hopefully do more of these, and that's something for later on. And I wish I knew how to build a solo, because I don't seem to do it. I seem to just go full pelt. But this is about what you play. I think a lot of people, they when they begin, they see the key signature for the tune, and they just think to themselves, well, I can actually play in the key signature throughout the whole tune, which is fine. You can play, for example, a major scale in that key signature, and you're away, and you can just play any note you want in that scale, and generally it'll fit. It'll sound quite nice, and that's, I think, what I did for a while. I sort of I'd found a blues scale, summertime or something, relatively straightforward to play over. But I think to make the transition from being a noodler to being someone who actually starting to understand what they do is to play over the changes, and that's something that is the changes are is what you've got to learn, really. And it's kind of learning what the chords are and learning just the fundamentals, the root, the third, the fifth, and a dominant seven or a major seventh, what those notes are in every chord, major and minor and diminished. There's a lot to learn, and I think what I would do when I started to do this, I would take each song and sometimes write them on, write the first, third, and fifth above the chord. And it's a hey, this is something I did myself. It's not the best way, because I think you should just learn all of them, by rote, just all your arpeggios. That would be the fantastic solution. But I just wanted to play, and I wanted to do it quickly. So I'd go, okay, well, as a C is a C, E, G. Oh, right, okay, it's a minor C, E flat, G. Oh, it's a diminished C, E flat, G flat, F sharp. And I just write them down above the note, and I just make sure I include those when I was playing the solo, and kind of worked for me. But the goal is to be able to take the backing track away, take take any accompaniment out, and be able to improvise over the chords, so that to the listener they think, I know the shape of the tune, I know what that tune is, even though he's not playing the melody. He's including some chord tones that follow the fundamental sort of pattern of the tune, and that's what you want to be able to achieve, not necessarily playing a blues scale throughout the whole piece of music, or playing one scale. So that was a fundamental shift for me. Something that happened about 6 months, I think, after I started improvising. I started twigged. I thought, this actually does take some work. So that was interesting. And now every day I play, every time I try a new song, I think, oh, I don't know that chord. I have to, and it's a constant learning process. And yes, I'm sure if I'd gone to Berkeley or Leeds College of Jazz or whatever, I would know all these things, because I'd have these scales built into my fingers of 4 hours practice a day. But this video is not aimed at people like that. It's just aimed at your recreational hobby player. So I don't know if this has helped. Let me know what you think. Write something, and like I said, the caveat: I'm not a pro. But I'd like to do some more of these things. I'd like to do a song and talk about it before and afterwards. Maybe that's something that might work. Perhaps if you feel that's good, you perhaps suggest some tunes that you want me to do, and I'll have a go at them, and we can sort of go through it together. I can look at the chord changes with you and think, okay, what would I do over this, and is this really going to work, and what do I know I can't do, so what will I try and do to try and get away with it. Maybe that'd be good, something to do. So I hope this has been a successful venture, and perhaps next month or next week, if I get time, I'll do another one. Thank you.